I never thought I'd be sitting across from my husband in a lawyer's office, watching him slide papers toward me with that smile, the one that used to make me feel safe, but now made my skin crawl. "Just sign here, honey. It's for asset protection," he said, his voice smooth as Tennessee whiskey. After 15 years of marriage to one of Atlanta's most respected real estate developers, I'd learned to trust James with our finances. But something felt off that day. The way his attorney avoided eye contact, the way James kept checking his watch. I picked up the pen, my Harvard law degree feeling like ancient history after years of playing corporate wife. That's when my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Don't sign anything. Meet me at Peachtree Coffee in 20 minutes. I excused myself to the bathroom, heart pounding against my ribs. I never imagined that coffee would save everything I'd guilt, or that my husband's Rolex collection funded more than just his vanity. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, when I still believed in fairy tale endings and the man who promised me one. I met James Harrington at a charity gala in Boston when I was finishing law school. He was already making waves in real estate development, charming, ambitious, and 10 years my senior. My parents, both academics at MIT, were cautiously impressed by the flowers he'd send and his talk of building legacies together. Mom would later admit she worried about the age gap, but what 26-year-old listens when she thinks she's found her perfect match? We married at his family's estate in Virginia. Old money, old connections. His mother, Eleanor, a Southern belle with razor-sharp edges, whispered as we cut the cake, "You better give him sons, dear. Harrington men need heirs." I laughed it off, but those words were the first thread pulled in what I'd discover was a carefully woven tapestry of expectations. I put my legal career on hold when James's company expanded to Atlanta. "Just temporary," he assured me, "until we get settled." Temporary stretched into years as I became the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties, joining the right boards, and making connections that helped secure his biggest deals. When I mentioned returning to law, he'd laugh. "Why would you want to work for someone else when what we're building together is so much bigger?" The summer of our 5th anniversary, I miscarried our first child. While I was still in the hospital, James took a call about a property acquisition. When I started crying, he patted my hand and said, "Don't worry, we'll try again when this deal closes." That night, alone in my hospital room, I realized how easily I'd been sidelined in my own life. Still, I stayed. We built our dream home in Buckhead, a 6-bedroom Georgian mansion with a sweeping staircase I'd fantasized about since childhood. We finally had our daughter, Lily, after 3 more miscarriages. James seemed disappointed she wasn't a boy, but I was ecstatic. For her, I convinced myself our marriage was worth preserving. When Lily turned 8, I found emails on James's laptop. He'd been seeing someone, a 24-year-old interior designer who'd worked on our lake house. When confronted, he didn't deny it. Instead, he said, "You've been so focused on Lily, what did you expect?" As if his infidelity were a natural consequence of motherhood. We went to counseling, his idea, surprisingly. The therapist suggested I find my own identity outside our marriage. So I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic downtown, using my dormant skills to help domestic violence survivors with restraining orders and custody arrangements. I felt alive again, useful. James seemed supportive, even proud when I mentioned it at dinner parties. "My wife, the crusader," he'd say, his arm around my waist, grip a little too tight. What I didn't know then was that James's company was facing a federal investigation for fraudulent property valuations, or that he'd been moving assets into offshore accounts for months, or that the papers he wanted me to sign weren't about asset protection, but about making me complicit in his schemes while signing away my ownership rights to everything we'd built together, including my grandmother's inheritance that had funded his first major Atlanta development. The facade began cracking the night of our 15th anniversary. James gifted me a diamond bracelet in front of our friends, then whispered as he clasped it, "You should really sign those papers tomorrow, for Lily's future." His eyes weren't loving, they were calculating. And suddenly, 15 years of subtle dismissals, controlled finances, and isolated decisions clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. The morning of the lawyer meeting, James was unusually attentive, bringing me coffee in bed, suggesting I wear the cream St. John suit he'd bought me for Christmas. "You always look powerful in that one," he said with a wink. I remember thinking how strange it was, him wanting me to feel powerful on the day he needed my signature. In the kitchen, I checked our joint account balance on my phone, a habit I'd developed since finding the emails. The balance was lower than it should have been after a recent property closing. When I mentioned it, James kissed my forehead. "Just moving things around for tax purposes, nothing to worry about." On the drive downtown, he talked about Lily's summer camp options and a potential vacation to the Hamptons. Normal conversation, except his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Outside his attorney's office, not our usual family lawyer, but someone new from a firm I didn't recognize, James took a call. I heard him say, "Yes, she's signing today. Wire the money tonight." When I asked who it was, he said it was his contractor. But James never handled contractors directly. That's what project managers were for. Inside the office, everything felt orchestrated. James's new attorney, David Mercer, was overly friendly, asking about Lily's dance recital while spreading documents across his mahogany desk. I noticed the Rolex on his wrist matched James's, same model, different color. A strange coincidence or a recent gift? The thought flickered briefly before David started his rehearsed explanation. "These are standard asset protection instruments," David said, sliding the first document toward me. "With the current economic climate, many of our high net worth clients are restructuring." He talked about liability shields and tax efficiency, using technical jargon that was meant to intimidate, not inform. I caught phrases like irrevocable transfer and beneficial interest relinquishment. "Could I have a copy to review first?" I asked, remembering my property law professor's first rule: never sign what you haven't thoroughly read. James laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah, we've been over this at home. It's just paperwork to protect what we've built from potential lawsuits." "The West Side development has some environmental groups making noise." "Then why am I signing over the Buckhead house and my grandmother's trust properties?" I pointed to a paragraph that explicitly mentioned both. David jumped in smoothly. "Those assets are being placed in a protected family trust. You'll still have access, of course. As a beneficiary," I noted, "not as a trustee. And James is the sole trustee." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. James's smile tightened. "You're overcomplicating this, Sarah. Remember when you were stressed about the preschool applications, and everything worked out because you trusted me?" His tone was gentle but patronizing, the same voice he used when talking me down from female hysteria, as he once called it. "I'd still like my own attorney to review these." I reached for my phone. James's hand covered mine. "We don't have time for that. The West Side closing is tomorrow, and these need to be filed today." His fingers pressed into my wrist. Not enough to hurt, just enough to remind me of his physical advantage. "Don't make this difficult, Sarah. Think about Lily." That's when I noticed the signature page of the third document. It contained a consent to liquidate the educational trust my parents had established for Lily, a trust that, by its original terms, could only be accessed for her education or when she turned 25. James needed my signature to break those conditions. "Why are we touching Lily's trust?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Diversification," James said quickly. "We're moving it to better performing investments." David nodded, adding, "The current structure is outdated, tax inefficient." I stared at them both, these men in matching watches discussing my daughter's future as if it were just another asset to be shifted around. Something cold and clarifying washed over me. I'd spent 15 years translating James's actions into the language of love, making excuses for his control, his dismissals, his betrayals. I need to use the restroom, I said, standing so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly across the floor. Can't it wait? James asked, glancing at his watch. We have that lunch reservation at Bacchanalia. It can't. I grabbed my purse and walked out before either of them could object. In the bathroom, I leaned against the marble countertop, hands shaking as I read the text message again. Don't sign anything. Meet me at Peachtree Coffee in 20 minutes. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but the area code was local. Who would know I was here? Who would care enough to warn me? I splashed water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, Chanel Rouge Allure in Pirate, James's preferred shade on me, and made a decision that would change everything. I texted back, on my way. I told James I wasn't feeling well and needed fresh air. I'll meet you at the restaurant, I lied, something I rarely did before that day. His eyes narrowed, but with his attorney present, he couldn't make a scene. Don't be long, he said, kissing my cheek possessively. Peachtree Coffee was crowded with the midday rush. I scanned the room, unsure who I was looking for, when a woman in her 50s with a sleek gray bob waved from a corner table. As I approached, she extended her hand. Catherine Winters, I worked for your husband's company until 3 months ago. You were James's CFO, I realized, recognizing her from company parties. Until I refused to sign off on falsified financial statements. She opened her laptop. I've been trying to contact you for weeks, but your husband has you well insulated. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine laid out evidence that turned my world inside out. Bank statements showing millions diverted to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Property valuations inflated by over 300% to secure loans. Shell companies with my name listed as an officer, entities I'd never heard of. And most damning, a divorce filing, already prepared, dated for the following month, claiming I was entitled to minimal assets due to a post-nuptial agreement I was apparently signing today. The SEC investigation is closing in, Catherine explained. He's isolating assets he can protect and setting you up to take the fall for the rest. She slid a business card across the table. This is Daniel Rosenval, a forensic accountant who's been helping me document everything. And this, she handed me another card, is Ellen Chen, the best divorce attorney in Atlanta. My phone buzzed with texts from James. Where are you? Lunch is getting cold. This is embarrassing, Sarah. I looked up at Catherine. Why are you helping me? Because James ruined my career when I wouldn't play along. Because I have a daughter too. She closed her laptop. And because no one deserves what he's planning for you. I made it to Bacchanalia 40 minutes late. James was on his third martini, smile brittle as I slid into my seat across from him and David Mercer. There she is, James announced too loudly. Feeling better, darling? I placed my napkin in my lap, ordered a sparkling water, and looked my husband in the eye. I'm not signing those papers, James. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. We can discuss that at home. David and I were just talking about the Harringtons' annual 4th of July party. Your mother-in-law is flying in next week to help plan. I know about the offshore accounts, I said quietly, and the shell companies in my name, and the divorce filing dated for next month. The color drained from James's face. David coughed, suddenly interested in his lobster bisque. I don't know what you're talking about, James said, voice tight. You're confused. I'm actually seeing clearly for the first time in 15 years. I leaned forward. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually notice? Harvard Law, remember? Or did you convince yourself I was just the pretty accessory you could manipulate? James grabbed my wrist, smiling for anyone watching us. Keep your voice down. Whatever you think you know, I know the SEC is investigating you. I know you've been falsifying valuations. I know you were planning to divorce me after I signed those papers today, leaving me holding the bag for your fraud while you disappeared with our money. I pulled my arm free. How am I doing so far? David started gathering his things. I should give you two some privacy. Sit down, David, I said sharply. You're part of this too. Conspiracy to commit fraud doesn't look good on a law license. The restaurant seemed to quiet around us. James's face contorted with rage, then smoothed into the charming mask I'd fallen for years ago. Sarah, you're having some kind of breakdown. Let me take you home. I've already called Ellen Chen, I said, watching recognition flash in his eyes. She's waiting at her office with a forensic accountant and all the documentation Catherine Winters provided. That vindictive bitch, James hissed, she's lying to you. The offshore account statements with your signature aren't lying. The property valuations aren't lying. I stood up, gathering my purse, and the divorce papers with next month's date certainly aren't lying. James stood too, desperation replacing anger. Sarah, think about what you're doing. Think about Lily. I am thinking about Lily. That's why I'm making sure her father doesn't steal her future. I stepped back as he reached for me. Don't come home tonight, James. The security codes have already been changed, and there's a security team waiting if you try. As I walked away, James called after me. You're nothing without me. Who do you think you are? I turned, feeling the eyes of the lunchtime crowd on us. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Montomo Harrington, and I'm taking back everything you tried to steal, starting with my life. I walked out of Bacchanalia with my head high, leaving James and his attorney stammering excuses to the curious onlookers around them. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't James Harrington's wife. I was simply, powerfully myself. The next 48 hours were a hurricane of activity. Ellen Chen, a petite powerhouse who'd built her reputation dismantling the schemes of wealthy husbands, moved with surgical precision. We secured emergency court orders freezing James's access to our joint assets. Daniel Rosenthal, the forensic accountant, worked through the night tracing money trails across 3 continents. And I stayed in a hotel suite Ellen arranged, my phone buzzing constantly with James's alternating threats and pleas. He's panicking, Ellen observed as we reviewed documents in her office. That's good. Desperate men make mistakes. The mistake came sooner than expected. James attempted to wire $4.2 million from our joint business account to a bank in Switzerland, a transfer that triggered alerts thanks to the emergency orders we'd put in place. By that afternoon, the FBI had joined the SEC investigation, and James's passport had been flagged. I hadn't told Lily everything yet. At 11, she didn't need to know her father was potentially facing federal charges. But she did need to know we wouldn't be living with him anymore. I took her for ice cream at her favorite place in Piedmont Park, watching her swing her legs as she contemplated my carefully worded explanation of Dad and I needing different homes for a while. Is it because of the fighting? She asked, surprising me with her perception. Or because of Amber? My spoon paused halfway to my mouth. Amber? Dad's friend who calls at night. I heard you yelling about her last month. The interior designer. Of course Lily had overheard. Children always absorb more than we think they do. Partly, I admitted, deciding truth was better than comforting fiction. But mostly because Dad and I want different things now. And sometimes, when grown-ups can't agree on important things, it's better to live separately. Lily nodded solemnly. Will we have to move? I don't want to change schools. No, honey, we're keeping our house. Dad's the one moving out. Her eyes widened. But it's Dad's house. He always says he built it for us. Actually, I said, realizing how much James had shaped even our daughter's understanding of our family, I paid for half that house, and my grandmother's money helped start Dad's company. We built it together. 3 days after the confrontation at Bacchanalia, Catherine Winters connected me with 2 other former employees who had documentation of James's fraudulent practices. One had emails where James explicitly directed him to adjust property valuations. The other, his former assistant, had recorded a conversation where James discussed using my name on documents because she never checks that stuff anyway. With mounting evidence, Ellen advised me to file for divorce immediately, citing financial fraud and emotional abuse. "We need to get ahead of whatever he's planning," she warned. "Men like James don't surrender control easily." She was right. The following week, James's new attorney, David Mercer, had wisely recused himself, filed a countersuit claiming I had been complicit in any financial irregularities, pointing to my signature on various documents over the years. What he didn't know was that Catherine had already provided evidence that many of those signatures were forged. The turning point came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Harrington, James's mother, requested a meeting with me. We met at the St. Regis Hotel, where she maintained a permanent suite. At 74, Eleanor was still formidable, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her posture military straight. "You've caused quite the scandal," she said, as we sat in her living room, tea untouched between us. "James caused the scandal," I corrected her. "I'm just refusing to be his victim." Eleanor studied me with new interest. "You know, for 15 years, I've watched you defer to my son. I always thought you were weak." She leaned forward. "I was wrong." From her handbag, she withdrew a flash drive. "James has been stealing from the family foundation for years. I've suspected it, but couldn't prove it until recently." I stared at the small device. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you're Lily's mother, and because James is exactly like his father. Charming, brilliant, and morally bankrupt." Her eyes, so like my husband's, held surprising emotion. "I let my husband destroy people for 40 years because I was too afraid to stop him. I won't watch my son do the same to you or my granddaughter." The evidence on Eleanor's flash drive was the final nail in James's coffin. Bank transfers from the Harrington Family Foundation to James's personal accounts, falsified board minutes, grant money intended for community development projects diverted to shell companies. The FBI added wire fraud and embezzlement to their growing list of charges. 2 months after that fateful day in David Mercer's office, James was arrested at his girlfriend's apartment. The image of him in handcuffs made the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I felt no satisfaction seeing it, only a hollow confirmation that the man I'd loved had never really existed. The divorce proceedings moved quickly after that. With James facing criminal charges and most of his assets frozen, his leverage evaporated. The judge awarded me full custody of Lily, ownership of our home, and control of the legitimate business assets. Most importantly, Lily's educational trust was secured and placed under the protection of a court-appointed trustee until she turned 25. Rebuilding wasn't easy. Lily had nightmares about her father being taken away. I struggled with shame over not seeing the signs sooner, for allowing myself to be slowly erased within my own marriage. There were days I couldn't get out of bed, overwhelmed by the task of reconstructing an identity independent of James Harrington's wife. But there were bright spots too. I started working part-time at the legal aid clinic where I'd volunteered, focusing on helping women navigate financial abuse in their relationships. Catherine Winters and I became unlikely friends, meeting weekly for coffee to discuss the ongoing investigations and, increasingly, our lives beyond the shadow of James's fraud. 6 months after James's arrest, I received an unexpected call from Eleanor. "The foundation board is being restructured," she said without preamble. "We need someone with legal expertise and ethical backbone. Are you interested?" I was. The Harrington Family Foundation had done genuine good in Atlanta, funding educational programs and affordable housing initiatives. Under Eleanor's guidance and my legal oversight, we redirected its mission toward supporting survivors of domestic abuse, with a special focus on financial literacy and independence. A year to the day after I walked out of Bacchanalia, James accepted a plea deal: 15 years in federal prison, restitution of $18.2 million, and full confession of his financial crimes. I took Lily to visit him once, at her request. She needed to see him, to understand that despite his mistakes, he was still her father. The man who sat across from us in his prison jumpsuit looked smaller somehow, his charm dimmed by fluorescent lights and institutionalized routine. "You won," he said as Lily went to use the bathroom. "Are you happy now?" I studied the man I'd once built my life around. "This isn't about winning, James. It's about surviving what you tried to do to me, to us." He looked away first. "I did love you, in the beginning." "I know," I said, and meant it. "That's the tragedy. You loved me until you realized you couldn't control me completely. Then love became ownership." As we left the prison, Lily asked if we would ever be a normal family again. I hugged her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. "We already are a normal family, sweetie. Families come in all different shapes. Ours just changed form." That night, sitting on our terrace overlooking the Atlanta skyline, I finally opened the safe deposit box my grandmother had left me, the one James had never known about. Inside was a letter she'd written before she died and a deed to a small lakeside cabin in North Georgia. "For when you need to remember who you are," the letter read. "Every strong woman needs a place that belongs only to her." The next weekend, Lily and I drove up to the cabin. It needed work. The roof leaked, the porch sagged, but standing there beside the lake, watching my daughters skip stones across the water, I felt something unfamiliar. Possibility. Not the scripted future James had designed for us, but something wild and undefined, something entirely our own. It's been 3 years since that day in the lawyer's office. The mansion in Buckhead is sold. Too many memories. Too much of James's vision. Lily and I live in a renovated Craftsman in Inman Park now, walking distance to her middle school and my new law practice. I specialize in financial abuse cases, helping women untangle themselves from men like James. The cabin by the lake is our weekend sanctuary. I fixed the roof myself, learning from YouTube videos and friendly neighbors. Lily has become an avid kayaker, spending hours exploring the coves while I sit on the porch swing, drafting briefs, or simply watching the light change on the water. Eleanor visits sometimes, her relationship with Lily stronger than I ever imagined possible. "You remind me of myself before Carlton," she told me recently, referring to James's father, "before I let him convince me that compliance was the same as love." Last month, I received a letter from James. He's teaching business classes to other inmates, finding purpose in warning them about the consequences of white-collar crime. He asked for forgiveness. I'm not there yet, but I've stopped hating him, mostly for Lily's sake, but partly for my own. Hatred takes energy I'd rather spend rebuilding. Sometimes I think about that text message that changed everything. Catherine admits she sent it, risking her own legal position because, as she put it, women have to look out for each other in a world designed by men like James. She's right, of course. My story isn't just about one man's fraud. It's about the invisible threads that bind us, especially when we're too isolated to see them. If you're watching this and something in my story resonates, if you've ever dimmed your light to make someone else comfortable, if your financial decisions require another's approval, if you've been told that love means surrender, please hear me. You deserve to take up space. You deserve financial independence. You deserve to be more than someone else's accessory. Like and subscribe if this story helped you. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say no to the pen being pressed into your hand.